If you still somehow haven't played it and you're watching this, just go play it.
I gotta go, guys. I apparently have to go play a video game real quick.
We are today discussing all about D&D in the media. So let's go around the circle and we'll let everyone introduce themselves. So let's start with Tenny, the host today, the other host.
Hi everyone, I'm the board operator for this stream. I run the Dicely D&D YouTube and Twitch channel, as well as the game master for the Play Dicely Actual Play and YouTube channel.
Hey, I'm Ryan the Fantastic Fiend. I have a YouTube channel where I post very randomly just to kind of exit my random fixations onto the internet because my brain is a very funny thing. But I also live on the Dicey YouTube channel as one of the players in Denny's lovely campaign, which streams bi-weekly on Sunday. You should come check it out.
Hey, I am the Bear Bard from Bear Bard's Tales. I do a lot of D&D horror stories, TTRPG horror stories, kind of explore the space, see what lessons we can learn from there, branching out to a little bit of different stuff coming soon. Yeah, and I'm also in his game. He just doesn't know it.
Oh, it's my turn. Hi, I'm Fred Weller. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel, and I also teach on Lighthall right now, apparently. And I'm the one who's responsible for corralling all of these people into this train wreck, which I'm hoping we can keep on the rails for as long as possible, called the Dungeon Master Roundtable.
And I am Juice from the Master the Game YouTube channel. You can find it at youtube.com/c/masterthegamerpg. I talk about various tabletop RPGs, D&D, Dragon Age, Pathfinder, Palladium books, whatever you think of it. I probably talked about it at some point. I do tips videos. We also have, live plays and among other things. So go check us out.
Cool. So we can get into the questions then. So as I said, today we're mostly inspired by, or we're mostly covering media pieces that are related to D&D or about D&D or even just inspired by D&D. So we're just going to answer for the very first one, nice and simple. What's your favorite piece of media that is either related to D&D or inspired by D&D? And let's go with Tenny up first.
All right. Also, very awkward. I will mention the T in my name is pronounced like a D, so I'm sorry I didn't.
Is it?
I mean, of course, you see a D, you assume it sounds like a T. My apologies. So I think my favorite piece of media work that is inspired by D&D, at this moment, I would probably say Dimension 20's Fantasy High game that they did. It is just it's a nice introduction. Like, a lot of people get exposed to D&D nowadays through like Critical Role, which is a much more like heavy, serious kind of game. But I found Dimension 20 to be very, like, it is teetering less towards a true D&D game and more towards a D&D show. It's very snappy, hilarious, and frankly just quite silly, but also like I think that was their first game too, so the players in that game were learning, but also just putting on a fantastic improvisational piece, like a superb. I highly recommend Fantasy High by Dimension 20 for anybody out there who's looking for some sort of gateway into D&D.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think it's really quite interesting because there's a lot of discussion about whether or not streamed actual plays are the same kind of D&D as playing D&D, and there's stuff with like streamer rules that are separate and all that. So I like what you mentioned with that it's bordering on just being a D&D show. That's quite a unique take on the actual play thing, I think. So let's move on to Ryan, the Fantastic Fiend.
So related to D&D. I mean, it's kind of related to all fantasy, but Lord of the Rings. If you ever watch Lord of the Rings and feel like, this is a D&D campaign, boy, do you ever have a fun time watching it. Because as we all know, Legolas is the player who throws his dice anywhere in the room and just says natural 20 and no one questions it. So, and if you look at the rest of the players, you can find a lot of other great archetypes. And it's just a great time to watch. Sauron's a crazy evil lich, and we love that. We love that a lot. But if I want to say like a D&D game, I'm loving right now to stand Brandon Lee Mulligan, Critical Role Calamity. It's kind of a banger.
Absolutely, and I mean, with Lord of the Rings, I mean it's hard to not see the connection. The two are so intimately related. According to the law, at a few points in the early history, maybe a little bit too related by legal standards.
Yeah, wasn't there like an issue with like hobbits that had to turn into halflings?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Alex with Bearbard Tales.
So I love Baldur's Gate. That was like my first little bit, but honestly, my favorite, inspired by D&D media, is KOTOR. I love both the KOTOR games because it uses the they made Baldur's Gate, then they used the same D&D I think it's 3.5 system, and just slapped it into 3 or 3.5, and they just slapped it into Star Wars, and that game like is one of the games that like changed how I looked at video games. I was in like middle school, so like the twist, I'm just like, oh my god! I'm not gonna give it away, a 20-year-old game, but yeah, that game it totally changed it, and it made me actually look at stuff like D&D, and I remember the first time I looked at D&D after, I'm just like, oh, I've seen this kind of stuff before. I couldn't remember what until it hit me that it was KOTOR, but yeah, I love that game so much.
That's new information to me now, and now I have to go back and play KOTOR. And
Yeah,
see
the
all
stat
this.
system is it's 1-for-1. It's not, they didn't even like hide it. It just is, and it's all their stuff is role based. That's why you can miss and stuff like that. So it's just D&D, and they have dice in the background.
That's amazing.
I'm so ashamed I didn't even think of KOTOR. I played KOTOR before I played D&D, and it was like, my God, this is an easy transition.
Well, and that's what helped me when I first started D&D is the fact that I played, like the Baldur's Gate was I played that a little bit, and I played the console one where it was more of like a gauntlet style as opposed to, but yeah, KOTOR. I
Maybe
played
that's-
hours and hours and hours of KOTOR.
I was gonna say maybe that's why I connected with KOTOR so much, because I kind of with CRPGs I kind of have chronic restart-itis, where every single time I started I get like 3 hours in and go, no, my build's wrong because I didn't know this. I'm gonna restart, and then I get like an hour farther the next time, and then I restart again so that I can improve my build some more. Whereas if it's a CRPG based off of a game that I already kind of know, it's a lot smoother, and I don't restart as constantly. I can actually make it like 10 hours into a game before I restart then.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's one game that I do keep. I go back and play a BioWare game every year, but that game I've probably beat, I don't know, at least a dozen times, which is,
Have we mentioned that KOTOR stands for Knights of the Old Republic? It's a Star Wars
Star
game.
Wars
Oh,
Knights
yeah.
of the Republic. It's honestly, in my opinion, like the best Star Wars game ever, and one of the best Star Wars stories, period. I know that's kind of like sacrilegious, but it's so good.
It's so
The
true.
sequel's well worth your attention too.
If you
KOTOR 2
if you still somehow haven't played it and you're watching this, just go play it.
I gotta go, guys. I apparently have to go play a video game real quick.
I'm sure it's dirt cheap too. It's got to be dirt cheap.
Yeah, and you
It's
can
so
get it on your phone, on your tablet, yeah, you can find it everywhere. It's unlike Jade Empire. They actually went back and made it good for the PC and stuff like that. So
Sweet. Okay, so let's move on to Fred Wheeler.
Well, first off, there are so many really cool video games out there, and I'm not going to name one of them because I can't watch video games anymore, and I don't care about video games anymore, and I can't play them because they ruin my life. So, no video games for me. Stranger Things is really, really cool, but it's all right. No, actually, I was only kidding. I don't really want to see a Dungeons and Dragons, but they've already done that. How popular was that starter set? I think it just went pretty much didn't really do anything, did it? I think it was like one of the least interesting ones that anybody ever sort of picked up in terms of Dungeons and Dragons. So, nah, don't worry about Stranger Things. I was looking up the word media, and this question actually confused me so much. Mass communication. And I was like, oh, am I supposed to be talking about the internet and TV and television and so forth? And I'm like, so I was like, oh, YouTube. That'd be my favorite. No, but actually it's not. Even though I'm on YouTube, I don't care about that either. Dark Sun. I love Dark Sun. But nobody else does. If you're a dungeon master, you love Dark Sun, right? But your players hate it. And I've always found that there's no way to get away from it. The fact that you're in a world that's dying and so forth, nobody cares about that. So my real answer after all of my fiddling around here is I'm just going to go to the one that I think is where you go for everything, and that's Greek mythology. That's me. I'm old, okay. Let's get real. Dungeons and Dragons poached and stolen everything they ever did, and Greek mythology was pretty much all of it. And then they just took that and then packaged it, stamped an IP on it, and said it belongs to us. So I think Greek mythology has all of the stories, the monsters, the concepts, and even the concept of, I mean, there's the concept of the solo hero, and you don't see a lot of the groups going on adventures to succeed. But there is mythology and stories around that. Jason and the Argonauts is an example of that. So there are examples of that there. And Hercules didn't necessarily go off and do all this stuff alone. He often did have somebody else with him. So I think Greek mythology is the one I'm going to go with. Everything that has ever been done has probably been ripped off from that culture.
Yeah, I mean, almost certainly one of the original canons of like quest fiction. Absolutely, with Greek mythology, there's not too much that predates it. So yeah, great answer. So let's move on to Juice.
So I was thinking about this for a while. I've changed what my answer was going to be. It's so hard for me to pick a favorite. To me, it kind of changes with my appetite, like every couple hours, I'm like, it's this, it's now this. I want some ice cream. I want a burger. It just fluctuates. And so I narrowed it down to a few different things. I'm really enjoying the 4th season of Stranger Things right now. I have to wait for the dreaded second half or however many more episodes are coming in a couple weeks, but I'm really looking forward to that. Without spoiling anything, I like how they're kind of coming full circle with it. I didn't anticipate that because season 3 threw me for a loop. But season 4 has kind of brought me back in a little bit, and I'm enjoying it. I thought it was a little wonky, but so when it comes to shows and stuff, Stranger Things is up there. The Critical Role cartoon, I don't watch live plays, but their cartoon I thought was great. Was not what I expected. Within the first 5 minutes, I realized I better not watch this in front of my kids. I've enjoyed that. A show you can watch in front of children, though. I have 2 of them. Onward. It's on Disney Plus. That was a fun show. It's a cartoon, kind of like a Pixar thing, about a couple kids whose father had passed away, and it's in a fantastical world where basically like D&D was their past. So there's magic and things like that in it. It's really cool.
Underrated.
Oh, it's way underrated. It's so good. And I think they got a board game or something now that either just came out or is on the path to coming out, kind of like a role-playing game. And then Dragon Prince is my absolute favorite show to watch. They need to come out with more frequent new seasons. That's on Netflix. Great show. Absolutely love it. And then for video games, I'm just going to jump to it. I've said it in the past on these roundtables. My absolute favorite IP when it comes to video games is Dragon Age, which does have a role-playing game by Green Ronin Publishing. It sucks me in. It's typical good versus evil with some gray shades of morality. You have the idea that you can either be for or against magic because, again, there's consequences to it. It's always somehow the threat has been building through 4 games now, and it's even greater than it was in the previous game. And just when you're like, oh, this is going to be the end of the world this time, it's like the next game somehow outdoes it. It's really cool. Each game's completely different than the other if you've never played them. So I absolutely love just that IP in general. And, it's definitely influenced by Dungeons and Dragons over the years and things like that. Just like most fantasy video games are. They all are based in D&D at the core of it. So
The team that did Baldur's Gate and then KOTOR is the one who did the first Dragon Age.
yeah, Origins was a great game.
Yeah, that's such. I'm actually going. I'm
Gotta
gonna
be
play Origins.
one of the best continuities of CRPGs in the world.
So good. Yeah, I'm doing a playthrough of Origins right now on Twitch.
Oh,
It's I love it. It's so good.
yeah.
I've been halted for a couple months, but I'll have to check yours out. I might do it again soon.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad that you gave a variety of answers there, because it really goes to show just how much, like, how many different things D&D has touched and inspired over the years. I mean, I swear I can't, like, if you go into the special features of half the fantasy and sci-fi movies, and the director will get asked, like, oh, or the screenwriter, director, whoever created the project gets asked, oh, where'd this story come from? Almost always the answer is, oh, it started as a D&D campaign.
Yes.
So it's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. So for me, my answer is it's not only one of my favorite pieces of D&D related media, but I also think it's quite funny because it's so high quality and it was inspired by something so low quality. Because my favorite is probably the comic Die by Kieran Gillen, which, if anyone has heard of it right now, the comic book didn't really seem to hit the D&D community all that much, but they just launched a Kickstarter a couple weeks ago for turning it into an actual TTRPG, and they got like $500,000 in like a day. So yeah, and it's a really great comic, and it's inspired directly from the worst place to take inspiration, which was like the 1980s Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, where it was like a whole bunch of kids get sucked into the game. And the Die comic is kind of taking that concept a little bit more seriously, where they're like coming back as adults and they didn't have a great time while they were sucked into the game, and now they're all, dealing with the consequences. And I just mostly really like how the comic structurally is set up in the same way that D&D games are, because there's kind of a hidden win state and a lose state that are not in any of the rule books that we all come across in our games. You win at these games if you can keep your group of friends together long enough to reach the end of the campaign. And Die, the comic, plays completely with that structure, where they're allowed to leave when everyone agrees it's time. So if you can't get everyone to agree, then, well, someone has to die. And it kind of very much mirrors the way that play groups work on, who wants what things out of each campaign. It's really good. I really recommend the Die comic. It's so good.
I don't think I've even heard of it. I'll have to check it out.
One of the things that makes me laugh when you say that, Tim William, is I'm thinking of the Jumanji movies that have been put out recently, where they use that sort of two-world model, kids going into and becoming adults and having to deal with a fantasy world. But let's get real. I wouldn't go. It's not too far from where we're heading, because I believe that Wizards of the Coast has made 4 starter sets for Dungeons and Dragons, of which only one has really been super popular, even though there's some people who are in denial and think that the Essentials kit has actually done all right. The original has always outperformed all of the rest. That's reality, people. And they are now making a 5th one. And they have gone for the throat this time. They are now calling on the power of the original Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, and including the characters in the front cardboard, in the front artwork, and the playable pre-made characters are those characters from that TV series. They've put them in there.
That's amazing.
No, they have.
The miniatures too.
They've got the miniatures. Yep, that's right. They just recently started showing pictures of the miniatures. And the story itself doesn't look like it's necessarily anything to do with that. But, like recognition. Remember? Recognition, that's what we want to aim for. That's how we make money. People remember that particular, but at least in Brazil. I think the box set, that new box set, Dragons of Stormwreck Isle will sell out in Brazil because Brazilians are absolutely insane over the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. Rest of the world, I suspect, I'm going with it's going to bomb again.
See,
I'm interested
I
just
thought it
because of the
looked good.
characters.
I remember when they announced it, I thought it looked pretty good.
Well, I guess for me, I almost think that marketing strategy doesn't make a lot of sense because, like, the people who are nostalgic about 80s D&D is not necessarily the overlap of people who need a beginner's box.
See, here's the thing though. What they do is they sell it, and new people don't care about that, so they just get like cool dragons. But then they also get old school players to buy a starter set that normally wouldn't because they get all these nostalgic characters and stuff.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and
it's a
I do know
twofer.
I do know some people who haven't played D&D in like 20, 30 years who have talked about the D&D cartoon. Maybe this is what brings them into 5e since they haven't played since AD&D. Maybe. I don't know. It might work. We'll see.
I hadn't
guess.
thought about returning players. I guess that does make sense as well.
So you feel like anyone that starts it just always plays it. They don't stop for more than like a year. They always come
There's a
back.
lot of people who give it up for like a decade because their group moved or whatever, especially older people like myself. And
No, that's fair.
Yeah,
probably
life
half
just
the people here.
changes.
Well, that was me.
Yeah.
I played it when I was
Kids.
like 20, and then I didn't get to play it again until I was like 30, just because the people I played with, they either went Navy or school or whatever. So
Yep.
I think maybe I just have some like survivor bias then, I guess, because whenever I go and there's no D&D game around, I just start one, so it feels like everyone's been playing it the whole time.
I do that now, but after high school, I didn't. After high school, until I met my wife, I didn't play RPGs really, other than on message forums. And then my wife actually brought me into D&D because I only played Palladium books before then. So, yeah, I'm backwards in how I got into the hobby.
also, a quick shout out since we're talking about medias to the old Dragonlance books.
Yes.
That was
I'm
my
excited for
first
the new one.
D&D. Was the old the novels rather, not the game books.
Yeah, I was a big Dragonlance fan, but at the time I had no idea it was connected to D&D. I didn't realize that till years later. Anyway, since that's back on topic, we can move on to the next question.